Hi everyone and welcome back to For Teachers. In today's video, I'm going to talk to you all about the mistakes that I made during my first year of teaching. Obviously, the mistakes that I made during my first year of teaching have probably taught me a lot and led me to where I am today, but I just thought I would share them with you anyway in the hope of saving you some time, maybe helping you to reach the stage that I'm at a little bit quicker, and hopefully to give you a good work-life balance during your first year of teaching. Okay, so the first mistake or learning curve that I'm going to share with you is the fact that in my first year of teaching, I used to write huge amount of comments in my students' books. And what I mean by this is every time my students did a piece of writing or a piece of maths in their textbooks, I used to write really long comments and really long messages for the students. Of course, it's really good to have that communication with the students and to let them know exactly where they've hit their targets, where they've achieved their goals and their steps forward. However, I was writing a lot. An example of a comment that I might write for a student would be something like, "Well done, Terry, you've done a really good job with this piece of writing. I really like how you've used connectives in your work. Next time, why don't you try using full stops at the end of your sentences? Why don't you see if you can add a simile in here somewhere? Fantastic handwriting, I can see you're improving your pace." And all of these comments used to take me a really long time to write. I used to spend several hours every single evening constructing my marking and making sure it was perfect, making sure my own handwriting looked really nice. I just don't know if the students really spend that much time looking at your messages and really taking them in. These days, I'm so much more likely to simply highlight where the children have achieved their goals in their work. For example, if I'm looking for connectives in the work, I might just highlight 3 examples of where they are. And instead of giving the children a really meaty, constructive comment, I might just provide them with a step forward. For example, I might skip the stage where I give a really long positive comment and just give them a step forward. So I might just put something like, "Write this sentence again, but try using a different sentence starter." And then just leave it and move on to the next book, because that student is probably only going to spend a couple of seconds looking at that comment. As long as they've got some kind of step forward or something that they can work on, I think they prefer the challenge to a really long comment. If I really want to give some positive praise or some feedback, I'm constantly giving my students that anyway. I'm always showing their work off. I'm constantly walking around the room and working with groups and letting children know verbally where they've achieved their goals. If I think for a particular student they need an extra push or they need some more guidance, I will give them that. I will sit with them, I'll show them where they can do that, I'll show them how to apply that in their work, but I'm not wasting as much time anymore writing really nice comments for students in their books. I think the sooner you can find a good balance with this, the better off you will be with your workload. The next mistake I made in my first year of teaching that I think you should avoid doing is worrying whether the students like you. I wasn't trying to be their best friend all the time, but I definitely spent a good portion of my time worrying if the students liked my lessons, if they liked me as a teacher, if they were respecting me, and if they were going home and telling their family they had a really good day and they really liked their new teacher. And I think this is a trust thing, and I think you need to know that if your behaviour management is on point, if your classroom is well organised, and if you're providing lessons that the children are engaged with and they're enjoying, they are going to like you as a teacher. It doesn't really matter what your personal teaching style is. Some teachers are more strict. Everyone has a completely different and completely unique style when it comes to teaching. You don't need to worry if the students will like you. They will let you know if they like you. They will let you know through their engagement with your lessons. If you find out that children are going home and talking a lot about your lessons at home, for example, when you have a parent-teacher meeting, if the parent says to you, "They always talk about school at home," then you know you've done that. You know you've achieved it. Also, you don't need to worry about every student liking you anyway. You don't need to be their favourite teacher. You just need to be a good, positive influence on their life at that stage that they are at. And if you do feel as though the bond isn't there or the bond isn't happening with the students in your class, try playing some team games, try talking to them a little bit more or asking them more about their interests and doing maybe a show and tell type activity, even with older students, just to get them to open up and try to get to know you a little bit more as a teacher. But try not to worry about being their best friend or worry about whether or not they like you. Chances are they do. The next mistake that I made a lot during my first year of teaching is trying to imitate the teaching style of other educators. A lot of the time I would observe another teacher acting in a certain way with their class, and I would imitate that teaching style because I would see that as quite positive, I would see it working well, and I would think, I'm going to try this myself and see if it works with my students. And some of those things did work. That can be a really effective way to improve your own practice and learn a lot about yourself as a teacher. However, your first year of teaching is all about finding your own personal teaching style and seeing what works with your students. If you find that you're copying the behaviour management techniques of another teacher and they're really not working for your class, then you need to start having a think about developing a system that works really well for you. An example of this for me personally might be, I once went into another educator's room and I heard them doing a call and respond activity. So the teacher was saying 1, 2, 3, and the students would then respond with something like sing with me, and it was very sing-song and it was really lovely and it worked really well for the students and the teacher in that room. So I decided to go and try it. I went into my own classroom and started singing to the students. They didn't get it, they didn't like it. I felt very, very silly, it didn't work for me at all. So I decided to start having a think about developing something with my class that worked really well for me. Remember, every teacher in the school is going to have their own take on the behaviour management policy, so you need to find something that works for you and your class. The next mistake that I feel I made in my first year of teaching was not embracing real-world events in my classroom. I was very afraid to go off on a tangent. I would make a plan and I would stick to it 100% because I was a little bit worried that if I deviated from that, I might miss out on the learning objectives that I'd set myself in that plan. I would also worry a lot about the coverage of my lessons. If I was to skip out 20 minutes of this maths lesson because a child started talking about something completely irrelevant, then how would I make up that maths time? How would I make sure that I still taught that? Now that I'm 6 years into my teaching, I know that if a child brings up something and it is relevant to the learning and it is a bit of a tangent, I am okay to go off on that tangent and talk to the students about that. You have to have a lot of trust in yourself and you have to have a lot of trust in the fact that your lesson will get back on track eventually. And you do need to learn to size up what the students have said. Is it relevant to the learning? Can you go down that rabbit hole, or is it going to take you too far from your lesson objective? But you need to trust yourself that if the students are excited by something, if there is a big world event that's coming up that you think would be really important to bring into your classroom, you can go off on a tangent, you can deviate from your lesson plans, you can deviate from your week plans. For example, if you are teaching all about chocolate or Aztecs, and that week there is a solar eclipse, you can't really ignore that. You need to bring that into your classroom, especially if the students are excited by it or are talking about it. Maybe they've seen something on the news, maybe there's been a disaster somewhere in the world and the students are coming into the classroom and talking about it. You kind of need to scrap what you were going to teach and go with the real world event sometimes, and you have to trust yourself that if you go off on a tangent, you can bring it back round and you can still teach what you have planned as well. So I wish I had trusted myself to go off on a tangent more. And I think these days I definitely do. These days I'm more likely to listen carefully to what the students are buzzing and what they're talking about and bring it into my lessons. The next thing that I used to do, and I still do from time to time, a little bit guilty of this one, is moving mountains for lesson observations. Especially during my first and second year of teaching. If I knew I had a lesson observation coming up, I would be frantically planning, I would be making incredible resources, I would be making sure that lesson was perfectly constructed, I would have every single stage of that lesson methodically planned, I would be panicking if that did deviate or if maybe I didn't stick to my timing on that lesson. I would want to show what I considered to be a perfect lesson and a perfect representation of my own teaching. Thankfully, after a couple of years, I am now aware that a lesson observation is not a complete reflection on my own teaching, but it's more a reflection on the learning of the students and the way that they are responding to my teaching. I don't move mountains for lesson observations anymore. I finally trust that the teaching that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis is good enough for a lesson observation. So now I try really hard not to deviate from my natural lesson planning for that week. I try and stick with what I had anyway on that block, and I want to show that lesson to whoever is observing. It might take you a couple of years to trust yourself as a teacher and trust yourself that your actual day-to-day lessons are good enough for a lesson observation and that your observer is not looking for perfect practice every single time. I really wish that during my first and second year of teaching I had got myself into the flow of that and maybe not worried so much about lesson observations. What I want to do is bring confidence to anyone watching this that your lesson observations, although they might be very scary at the start and it might be something that you feel you need to move mountains for now, as you grow as an educator, you will start to trust yourself more and you will show a natural lesson, not something that you've pulled out all the stops for. The next mistake that I made as an educator during my first year of teaching is not knowing when to go home. I used to spend a huge amount of time in school. I would get there ridiculously early. I was probably there for 7 o'clock every single day, and I was likely staying until 5:30, 6 o'clock, maybe 7 o'clock, going home and doing some more work at home as well. And that is not healthy for a teacher. It really, really is not. If I could speak to my first year self, I would say you need to choose a day where you cut off and you leave at 4 o'clock, or you need to try and average out your time a little bit better so that you're leaving half an hour or 45 minutes earlier every single day. If you are completely unable to get your work done in that time slot, I understand that might make you feel uncomfortable, it might make you feel bad, you might feel like your lessons the next day are going to take a hit because of it, but you need to be looking after yourself and your own well-being just as much as the students in your class. So learn when to quit, learn when enough is enough. If your body is telling you and your mind is telling you that you've done far too much that day and you need to go home and relax, or you need to go and spend time with your friends and family, listen to that inner voice, clock out and go home. Your own well-being is incredibly important as a teacher. That's why we hear about so many teachers burning out during the first year of teaching. They don't know when enough is enough. If it's becoming too much, if you really can't stay on top of things and you feel you need to talk to someone, try having a word with your phase leader or someone in your school that you trust that you can talk to and just say, I can't keep on top of my workload, I need some help. Maybe you could talk to your English lead or your maths lead about some time-saving tips for lessons, or you could work with your mentor and look at your planning long term. Am I going to be able to keep up with this? Is this going to be too much for me? On this channel we have some videos about work-life balance. Please check those out and see if you can take some of our tips into consideration in order to look after your own personal well-being. The next mistake I made during my first year of teaching is not making positive use of my union. If you are a first year teacher, chances are you've joined one or maybe more teaching unions. Some examples of teaching unions are posted down below in the description box of this video, and if you have signed up for a teaching union, try to make positive use of them. In the couple of times that I have had to use my union, I've picked up the phone, I've spoken to someone, and I have always come away from that conversation feeling so much more confident and so much more secure in my knowledge. The union is there to support you. You are paying money for advice and you are paying money for teaching support. If something doesn't feel right in your classroom, if you feel as though something is unfair or perhaps something is not being done properly, or perhaps you've been asked to do something that doesn't sit right, maybe you think it's not appropriate for a teacher to be doing this kind of activity, or you think you've been asked to do something that's too much for where you are in your career so far, try calling your union and find out what your rights are as a teacher. They're very helpful. They want to help you. That's their job. And they do know the policies and the standards of teaching really well. And if you are not signed up for a teaching union, make sure you do get signed up, because if there is ever a problem in school, or you believe that something has been done unfairly, or you should have had a representative with you when you've had a conversation with a member of staff, you can call up, you can check your rights, and they will support you. I wish I had made better use of my union during my first year of teaching, just to check up on things. I don't think I wanted to bother them for some reason, or I wanted to show that I was really independent and I was doing really well by myself, but I could have just called them at any point and just checked a couple of things over with them, and that probably would have made me feel 100 times better. The next thing that my first year teaching self was guilty of was making lots of beautiful, laminated, well-constructed, welcoming displays and banners and resources for my classroom. Realistically, I did not need to laminate all those things that I made for the students, unless you are laminating something with the intention of using it again and again and again and again and again. Laminating is really bad for the environment. You are coating the resource in a single-use plastic. So please, unless you are using something continuously and you plan on putting this on display every single year or using an activity over and over again with the students, try to think about a different way to present this challenge to the students. Could you have it loaded on an iPad screen that's on the table with the students? Could you have it on your interactive whiteboard? Could you print just 3 copies and have different stations around the room that the students travel over to generate some movement in the classroom to complete their answers? There are lots of different ways to avoid doing this, and I know that in my first year of teaching I made so many nice things and I spent a really long time making all my resources really beautiful, lots of pictures on them, and yes, it's nice, and I know the students do like seeing a cartoon character on their math sheet, but really it isn't necessary every single time. Just have a think about whether it's worth the extra effort that you are putting into it. Finally, something else that I was very guilty of doing during my first year of teaching is trying to solve everything. I wanted my students to be happy academically, socially, personally. I wanted my students to be happy at home. I wanted my students to be happy in school. I wanted to look after them emotionally. I wanted to give them social skills. I wanted to give them the academic understanding that they deserved. And there are so many things that I wanted to provide for my students. And of course, I still want to provide all of those things. I want to be the best teacher that I can be. However, I cannot solve everything. And I think I'm more understanding with myself now, and I know that on a day-to-day basis, I can do the best I can. And sometimes some of those students are still going to have problems. They're still going to have issues that need to be dealt with. I can help them. I can put things in place. but try not to go home and feel this huge responsibility looming over you all the time. It can be all-consuming as a teacher. Try to trust yourself that as an educator you're doing the best job you can for your students, and start to trust that in class you are doing the best lessons you can, even if not all of those lessons are outstanding lessons, and try to trust that you are doing the best you can for your students socially and emotionally as well. I hope my own personal reflection might help some educators that are watching this video with their first year of teaching. Let me know what you were guilty of doing during your first year of teaching down below in the comments. And if you are a new teacher, please let me know one thing that you found really helpful or useful from this video. Please subscribe to 4 Teachers and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps my channel to grow. And I will speak to you guys again soon.